Welcome back to the OIS Podcast. In this episode, Marc Gleeson, CEO of Azura Ophthalmics, explains how his early interest in architecture has served him well in his career path to being an architect of pharmaceuticals. Let's listen to his story.
Hello, and welcome to the OIS Podcast. I'm Dr. Paul Karpecki. I practice in Lexington, Kentucky, and today I'm honored to have a guest that has been in the industry, well, a few decades now, but has gone from large company level, really kind of playing a key role with Allergan for many years, where I first met Marc, and now running as CEO of Azura Pharmaceuticals, a very exciting biotech eye care company. And he, of course, is based down under in Australia. Marc, welcome to the podcast. Honored to have you here.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks to OIS for inviting me to be part of the discussion.
Wonderful. And that's what we're going to have today, just really a discussion. I'd love for people to get to know you and the company. Obviously, a very exciting company. In my space, you know, having worked in dry eye for a while, I know the importance of the role of keratin and the meibomian, and it's such a huge part of dry eye. Evaporative dry eye, according to LEMP and other research, is estimated to be about 86%, if not higher, of all forms of dry eye. And you've got something novel there. So I want to get into that, but let's start by getting to know you a little bit first. Can you take us through a little bit of your personal background, where you grew up and how you ended up running a company in the US for the time that you did, and then eventually as you've gone from the large company space into now CEO of Azura, how that developed?
Yeah, well, obviously, as from my accent, you can tell that I'm Australian. So I grew up on a beef and dairy farm in Victoria, about 100 miles outside of Melbourne. So, you know, lots of early morning starts, getting the cows up for the dairy farm and so forth. But went to boarding school in Melbourne, and then studied Bachelor of Science in Pharmacology and Physiology at Monash. What was interesting about sort of my education was really right up until, I suppose, halfway through my last year of high school, was all I ever wanted to do was become an architect. Now, people may say, what the hell does architecture and pharmaceutical and drug development have in common? But I was sitting in my office one day at Allergan in Irvine, in Tower 2 on the 5th floor, and I was describing to somebody what I actually did in my role. And I thought to myself, gee, I'm an architect. And so, there is a lot of parallels in terms of thinking about, when you're designing a building or so forth, you've got to think about what the environment's going to look like in 5 or 10 years, what the needs are of the person giving you the brief. And then you've got to work through all the regulatory elements. And then, as I say, you've got to make sure that the plumber, the builder, and the electrician do their thing. And I suppose pharmaceutical development and drug development, in a way, is very similar to that, in that you really have to think long term. You really have to understand what the customer needs are, what the environment is going to be like, both from a regulatory as well as a payer perspective, but then also put the plans in place and go through the process to make sure that the plumber, the builder, and the electrician do their thing, and then ultimately have a sign off and approval. So having finished my science degree at Monash, I was offered honours and could have gone down the academic route. However, I joined as a sales rep for Eli Lilly and Company in Australia, and that was my first entree into the industry. The first products that we were selling were Prozac 20 and Seclor, so that sort of gave me the background and training as to sort of the front end of the industry. 18 months after sales role, I got moved to Sydney to the head office to work in a marketing, new product planning area. So it was that early understanding of clinical development, phase 2, phase 3, that really got me excited as to what some of the opportunities were with really being able to shape how a drug was developed, and it increased my interest in actually getting really early on in the development process. I spent about 5.5 years at Eli Lilly, and then joined Janssen Pharmaceutica, where I was the marketing director for EPO, or Eprex in Australia. It was licensed. J&J had licensed that from Amgen. have a bit of a family history in politics here in Australia, and actually set up the corporate and government affairs role at Janssen. And then I had a phone call from a headhunter to said, would you like to join Allergan? Having worked mainly in sort of immunology, transplantation, I really hadn't heard of Allergan, and did my due diligence, and saw it as a great opportunity to become the pharmaceutical sales and marketing director in Australia and New Zealand. We were very small at that stage, but Botox was just starting to become an interesting product on the therapeutic side. So in 2000, I joined Allergan as the sales and marketing director. And then that was my first entry into ophthalmology. So we launched Alphagan here and across Australia and New Zealand. We launched a number of artificial tears lines, but I also had the opportunity to launch Botox Cosmetic across Australia and New Zealand. And then once we launched the cosmetic indication, then I became 100% focused on ophthalmology. As I said, I'd always wanted to have the opportunity to get early on in the development, and an opportunity came up within the global marketing group at Allergan to move to California. You'll recall Allergan had acquired a company called Oculex, which was the drug delivery system for Ozurdex and Durista. And I moved to California, or the family and I moved to California, and I started that role late in 2005 as the Senior Director of Global Marketing for the Retina franchise. And so that was my first entry, and moving the family halfway across the world was an interesting challenge with a 3-month-old, 2.5-year-old, and a 4-year-old. But and like a lot of these expatriate assignments, you convince your family to move halfway across the world, but for a period of time, and 3 years turned into 8 very quickly.
Wow. Now that is, you really truly have been a bit, as getting to know you, an architect of pharmaceuticals, because you do think with that strategic foundational kind of thing. And we're going to get into that more, because I know even Azura, we have very exciting drug that'll work in the meibomian gland dysfunction phase or area at some point as it gets through the approval process with FDA. But the company's a lot more structural than that, a lot more going on in terms of its base and its potential, and want to hear about that too. As you were going through these different pathways, Marc, being with a big company, and then obviously, heading up that sales and marketing first in that area, and then expanding your role as the Ozurdex and now Duristas came along for Allergan. Did you pick up a lot of key lessons that have helped you while in a big company like that to now be able to run a company at this stage? Were you involved at every level like that, or did you have to kind of learn a little bit more of that regulatory path and all of that throughout it to be able to get to running or being the architect of all these facets for a pharmaceutical company at this stage?
Yeah, the drug development process is a very complicated process. There's so many factors involved in it. And I suppose one of the benefits of working in the corporate environment at Allergan, you got exposure to a lot of different projects. I think at one stage, Allergan had 50 ophthalmic projects at all different levels, either discovery, early development, or in phase 3 development. So as part of being project teams, you were across lots of different projects at different levels of development. So you got to interact, understand, learn. And because there are multiple projects, some failed, some succeeded. And so you're able to learn all the various different nuances across that, and have exposure to lots and lots of challenges, but also lots of opportunities. And so that definitely is a key learning for me in terms of understanding the process. But on the commercial side, we also had the opportunity, as for example, if we take Ozurdex, for example, it was Allergan's first ever submission to the UK reimbursement agency, NICE. And so as that got approved, and right from the early development, the phase 2, phase 3, clinical development, going through the regulatory process, and then right up into working with our global health economics and health outcomes group to actually put in submissions to get funding and reimbursement. So you had the opportunity to touch a product, almost all the way along its development cycle, right through to launch. And that was immensely helpful as you come into a role like at Azura, where you really do need to not only think about the early side of things, but you really need to understand the journey that you're about to embark on, because the things and the decisions that you make now have a material effect on things that might happen in the next 3 or 4 years because of timelines that we have to work with.
Terrific insights in terms of the level that you're at and what you've been able to kind of attribute it to. And now, of course, I want to hear a little bit about Azura Pharmaceuticals. Tell us about this company, the uniqueness of it, how you acquired such an excellent team, and how far you are now in the development of your new product.
Yeah, so Azura was founded in 2014 by 3 Israeli ophthalmologists. One of them in particular, Yair Elster, had worked a lot with in California with Professor Jean Dewan and Foresight Labs. But the company was established really to begin developing a medical device to treat meibomian gland dysfunction. And so, as ophthalmologists, obviously you have a unique understanding of the clinical pathway, but it became apparent in their observations and trying to understand the disease that there could be a pharmacological solution to the problem. And so the company embarked on not only, I suppose, desk research and understanding of the pathology of the disease, but saw an opportunity given the relationship between meibomian gland dysfunctions and sebaceous glands. So that link between essentially meibomian glands residing in the skin of the eyelid, and how they're very similar in pathology to that of other dermatological conditions. And and this is where I think ophthalmology is unique, and it's one of the things that I always try to do. But really, at Allergan, it was, I suppose, drummed into us that you really know your customer. Spend a lot of time with your customer. We saw, Gavin Herbert would always be at AAO and other key meetings. David Pyatt was always with customers. When I first joined Allergan, I think 3 months after joining Allergan, David paid a visit to Australia, and we spent a lot of time on the road visiting customers. But one of the critical things for the founders was actually really understanding what the pathology was. And that led us down to this notion that really maybe meibomian gland dysfunction should be treated more like a skin disease than that of anything else. And so given the pathology was very similar to what we see in comedonal acne and so forth, and the fact that organizations like TFOS had put together expert panel reviews, bringing a lot of the science and clinical understanding together, it was a natural progression to then explore the use of these keratolytics to try and essentially disrupt and break open the aberrant protein aggregation that occurs in meibomian gland dysfunction. And so that's where it really all began. And then it became a journey of really just trial and error, just understanding whether there were any compounds or any treatments that were already approved that could be repurposed. Obviously, in our industry, intellectual property is critical. So there was a lot of time spent once we understood what the chemistry was behind how keratolytics work. We spent a lot of time as a company, expanding that, closing off some of those opportunities. And like a lot of things in ophthalmology, we basically went straight to the clinic with the medicated shampoo formulation of selenium disulfide. Selenium disulfide is our active agent in our lead compound, but it's actually approved as a medicated shampoo to treat seborrheic dermatitis in the US at 2.5%. And so before the company had raised any major amounts of money, obviously we wanted to see whether the drug actually moved any clinical endpoints, knowing full well that a medicated shampoo and the various different other excipients that were toxic to the ocular surface would not be suitable for ophthalmic application. The company embarked on a proof of concept study and had a very good result, which then led us to raise more money and then develop an ophthalmic formulation.
If you think about, kind of where it's at now, as far as, AZR MD 001, is it about just starting phase 3 clinical trials now, Marc?
Yeah, we've just started our phase 2B/3 program.
Phase 2B. So phase 2A, that's already completed. Now beginning phase 2B. Any surprises in the data on the upside or otherwise that came in? Because I was looking at some of the numbers. Obviously, as a keratolytic, I could expect a significant decrease in keratin, but lipogenesis, was it over 280% increase in lipid production? To me, that seems just fascinating. Was that something you were expecting to see, or were there other data points like that were that impressive?
Yeah, look, the mechanism of action of selenium disulfide is really interesting. We know that it's a keratostatic, so it slows down the cell replication cycle of keratinocytes and their future keratin proteins. It's a fairly potent disulfide bond disruptor, so it breaks disulfide bonds and the potential to loosen the plug. One of the side effects that people complain about its use as a medicated shampoo is that it produces an oily scalp. So we've done a bit of work in two different in vitro models to show that it can actually increase lipid production from sebaceous cells. So when you think about meibomian gland dysfunction as being a disease of blocked glands and poor lipids, the mechanism of action is a very interesting opportunity to really try it in that indication. I suppose one of the major surprising things for us was just the degree of, direct translation of the mechanism of action to the clinical endpoints. So, our three critical endpoints for our phase 2A study were meibomian gland score, which is essentially a measure of meibom quality, the number of glands yielding liquid secretion, which is a measure of the lower 15 glands and how many are actually producing a liquid, and then also OSDI. But if you think about the mechanism of action of AZMD001, its goal is to essentially open the glands and then improve the quality. And so we saw significant responder rates. And I suppose that's the biggest surprise for us, is the degree of response. So with the 1%, we saw up to almost 58% of patients responding to having near normal meibom. So that was a meibomian gland score of greater than 12. And so that direct link between the mechanism of action and the endpoint that we're measuring is critical.
That's fascinating. Meibomian glands yielding liquid secretion score of 12. Technically there could be 3 glands that just have expressed naturally and don't express. That's one of the highest I've seen to date in that field related to dry eye disease. And, we understand the role of meibomian gland dysfunction. So to be able to get it to that level where we're getting these nice liquid secretions is fascinating data and exciting for the future. Something that's so novel in terms of its approach. It'd be compatible with anti-inflammatories, but it really targets where the disease is for the majority of dry eye. Obviously, that's a big.
You say compatible, and that's one of the things I think when we, again, coming back to the architecture analogy and also just spending time with customers is, having spent 22 years now in ophthalmology, one of the biggest complaints that we would always hear is, patients have to have used 2 eye drops, they have to put one in, wait 5 minutes. And so as we thought about both obviously the compound, the formulation and application, so it's an ointment, which is very different to what people are used to using in dry eye disease. It's an ointment placed directly onto the eyelids, onto the meibomian glands, similar to what you would do if you were treating acne. And then you apply it just before you go to bed. And so the goal there was to really separate it from the use of eye drops, knowing full well that in a lot of ophthalmic diseases you have very much combination use. Different anti-inflammatories could be used in conjunction with our product if it gets approved, as well as other medical devices like Lipoflow or Ilux. So there's a compatibility across multiple different other options.
So the application is what's the frequency? It is an ointment and it's applied right onto meibomian gland, so almost external to a degree, right, where you at the site of where the disease is for at least 86% of dry eye patients. How often were they dosed in the clinical trial?
In the clinical trial, they were dosed 2 times per week. So keratolytics, and our goal in the program was really to get into the clinic very, very quickly. And so the label for selenium disulfide 2.5% shampoo is to be applied 2 times per week. And so we felt that given one of the studies was a dose and frequency ranging, and after an interim analysis, we saw a fairly significant improvement in efficacy, we felt that the twice per week application before bedtime was adequate. So that is also a unique approach as well.
It certainly is. We don't have anything currently that we would use in that level of frequency. Certainly from a compliance standpoint, patients will love that and will do extremely well. Now, that's exciting. That's certainly going to be a significant contribution as that goes through the regulatory pathway. What are your views for the company itself? Is this what you're going to kind of focus on? Are you thinking bigger as an architect? Is this going to be this broad kind of base as a whole city, as a skyscraper? What's the future for Azura, even beyond AZR-MD001?
Yeah, so our focus as a company is really to develop a whole new class of compounds for ophthalmology, really centered around these keratolytics and really addressing other lid margin driven ocular surface diseases. So keratolytics are a very interesting class of compounds. They've been utilized in the dermatology space for a very long time, and so if you take a compound like salicylic acid, it's a keratolytic, but it's also used as a penetration enhancer in a lot of dermatological agents. So the way we see sort of the company going forward is, we really want to leverage these unique properties. So the first part of it is, these disulfide bond disruptors. So selenium disulfide is the lead in that. And that's where we're really directly targeting aberrant or abnormal protein structures, deposition or aggregation in the meibomian glands. But we have an in-house chemistry program where we're developing a pipeline of products where we're actually conjugating keratolytics to other known compounds. And the idea behind the conjugation is that the conjugates are designed to metabolize fairly quickly when they hit the ocular surface. And in doing so, release both the keratolytic and the original compound. But when you conjugate compounds with keratolytics, you do a couple of things. Firstly, you have the opportunity to change the physicochemical properties of those drugs. So you can take what may have been a fairly hydrophilic compound, so something that may require a high concentration on the ocular surface. It may end up going down the back of your throat, causing adverse events. And you can turn that into a lipophilic compound. So you can use parts of the structures, parts of the periocular structures, such as even the meibomian glands, as part of the drug delivery process onto the ocular surface. I mentioned penetration enhancers and so forth, but again, we can identify compounds that may be too potent to go on the ocular surface. And by using these penetration enhancers, really reduce the concentration of these compounds and actually allow us to actually bring some other compounds that may not have been suitable to treating ocular surface disease and bring those to potential new indications as well. So we have a very broad approach in the early development, but in the short term, for us as a company, clearly, getting AZR-MD001 through the development aspect. There is one other program that we have, and this is where it's sort of coming back to parts of the learnings over a 20+ career in ophthalmology. Ophthalmologists and optometrists like to be part of the process. They have lots of different tools. They want to be able to treat patients in the clinic. So we're actually developing a physician-administered potent keratolytic that will allow, I suppose, a more aggressive, more potent keratolytic to be used for maybe more harder to treat patients. So we have a very broad portfolio of products.
It's exciting. That certainly is the perfect dental model where, they come in, get the deeper cleaning, when you go in for your teeth, and then you still go home and have the products, that you're using for brushing your teeth, flossing, that'd be an ideal approach. I like that too, to having something in the office that we may be able to then take care of the more significant, obstructed meibomian glands in those patients. Yeah, you've obviously done really well in large company structures and carried, played a key role in that. But you seem just perfect in the role of a CEO in a biotech startup as you're in right now. It just seems like you and comfortable place. Is that a difficult transition? And what advice might you have for others who have aspirations of getting into working with a startup or launching a company like you've done with Azura?
The opportunities out there in the small company world are very large. I think personally, I'm the sort of person that likes to get my hands dirty, get my hands, roll up my sleeve, and be involved in numerous different things. I look back when I moved from Johnson & Johnson, which was Janssen Pharmaceutical, to work with one of the largest healthcare companies in the world, to then join Allergan in Australia and New Zealand, where you really did have to roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty, do lots of different things. So I think, if you're that type of person, and knowing full well that, startups just don't have the same level of resources as bigger companies do, you've got to identify what are the right things to do to really, move programs along, and then drive value creation through that. But, I suppose my only, key learning and advice would be to really think about the type of person you are, the environment that you like to work in. What are the degrees of risk that you like to sort of have in your professional life? Because in our industry, you do get a lot of failures, and you can have the best plans, you can have the best execution, but due to some fundamental aspects of the drug, you may not necessarily see the outcome, the endpoint that you want at the end of the day. But it is a very fulfilling experience. You get to meet some fascinating people. You have, I suppose, a lot of opportunity to really think about problems and find very creative ways to find solutions.
It's outstanding, Marc. Really exciting time for you and again, the company, and really thankful that you're willing to share so many insights from kind of, where you began and where you are today, the key aspects that would be, good attributes for success, the way to think about who you are and where it all fits in. This was truly something I think the listener is going to find to be valuable, both from an innovation standpoint as well as even from a development standpoint and growth individually. You certainly are an architect as you think about all the key components that are there. I love that analogy, and you're achieving something structurally very impressive. So I want to compliment you on your leadership with Azura and also for sharing so much with our audience today. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Paul, and hopefully we'll get to see each other shortly.
Be nice to be in person again soon. Absolutely. Thank you, Marc.
All right.
Thanks for joining us on Marc's Journey. The next stop on the Ophthalmic Innovation Tour is the virtual OIS European Showcase, taking place on July 20th, where you'll get to interact with the leading European startups and industry executives from the convenience of your office. Visit OIS.net and register today. And be sure to join us back here next week for more insights and life experiences with the top ophthalmic innovators.